All right. So, yes, my name is Amin Karimu, University of Cape Town. I'm here to present a material market failure and climate smart agriculture in Africa. Right. One will ask why agriculture matters in the case of Africa. Two things comes to mind. One is that the sector is the largest employer um, in the region. Roughly about 1 in every 2 jobs created goes into agriculture based on statistics from the World Development Indicators. Also, it's a sector where, despite the fact that Africa relies so much on agriculture, Africa tends to spend roughly about $45 to $50 billion per year on food imports. Right? So this shows that though we rely so much on agriculture, it is not sustainable currently in terms of productivity, in terms of how we manage the land resources to produce food to feed the population. And therefore, to be able to reduce these food imports, we need to promote agricultural productivity beyond the current levels, right? In the sense that we need to probably increase climate-smart agricultural practices that will boost production and in the process reduce the import bill on food. Right, so this therefore indicate that despite we rely so much on agriculture and we highlighted the importance in terms of food security, the importance in terms of jobs, why is it that we are highly dependent on the sector, but still the sector is not able to produce enough to feed the continent? One of the reasons is what we refer in economics as market failure. One will ask, what is market failure? Right? Market failure is a situation where markets do not deliver the best outcome for the society, in the sense that it either overproduce what is needed or underproduce what is needed. In some instances, it does not even produce what is needed. So in that instances, it does not allocate the resources in an efficient manner such that it is fair and highly productive. One therefore will ask, what are the factors that give rise to this market failure? A key factor or factors that lead to market failure include externalities. I will define that later. Another is public good. Another is information asymmetry, market power, and incomplete markets. Right, I will take 10 to explain each of these factors that give rise to market failure. Of course, I would prefer to cover the first 4 and leave the incomplete market for you, the curious mind, to explore and see what is incomplete markets. Right. Externalities, what is it? One can define externalities as the side effect of economic activity that spill over to other people who are not directly involved in the transaction. Right. What do I mean by this? This is basically a situation where an individual's action affects a third party, though the third party is not directly involved in the activity. Right. So it could be a positive externality or a negative externality. Suppose a farmer who keeps bees, and these bees happen to be located in an area that they also produce maize, a maize farmer. And the bees help in pollination of the maize, right? So in this process, there's a positive externality from the beekeeper to the maize farmer. But of course, despite the maize farmer benefit from the pollination from the bees, the maize farmer is not directly involved in any transaction between the beekeeper and the maize farmer. So in that instance, we call it a positive externality. Of course, you can also get negative externalities such as water pollution associated with, a farmer that produce upstream, and there's a runoff from the farm to the downstream, where the downstream users rely on the water downstream for either consumption or production purposes. And because of the chemical that run down to the downstream, the users downstream will have to cost themselves extrally to be able to clean the water for use, either for production or for consumption purposes. And that would be a negative externality. Another, of course, example would be air pollution, where pollution from factories affect nearby residents, whose health will be impacted by the pollution from the industries, but the industry do not compensate the individuals in terms of their health outcomes. Right. Of course, another factor for this market failure, as I indicated earlier, is public good. And what is this? Public goods are goods that have two properties. One is that you cannot exclude individuals from enjoying the good, or it's so exorbitant to exclude people from enjoying the good, even if they are not directly paying for it. Another property is that it's non-rivalrous in consumption. What do I mean by this? That if an individual consumes the good, it doesn't reduce the availability of that good for another individual to consume the good, right? An example, clean air, right? So if all the population in Gothenburg are enjoying clean air, an additional person coming from Stockholm into Gothenburg, that clean air will still be available to that third person from Stockholm who comes into Gothenburg. So the Gothenburg population does not deplete the availability of the clean air if a third person comes into Gothenburg, right? So that's what we mean by it's not rivalrous in consumption. Its value doesn't diminish given that someone have already enjoyed the good, right? Examples of these public goods can be a public park, clean air, biodiversity conservation, as they have all these two properties I indicated earlier on. Right, another factor is information asymmetry, right? This is a situation where one party have more information than another party. And these two parties come into the transaction where the party with the informed information utilizes that to his advantage against the other party who doesn't have that much information about the good or service they are transacting in, right? So an example could be agricultural insurance, where farmers will know more about their risks, but will not provide this information to the risk insurer, right, to be able to price the coverage for the farm risks. Another could be agricultural input, where a seed dealer will know more about the quality of his seeds, right, whether they are low quality or high quality, but will not reveal this to the farmer who would not have this information, and therefore can extract some consumer surplus from the farmer who doesn't have this information, right? Another factor that leads to market failure is market power, right? What do we mean by market power? Market power is a situation where a company or group of companies come together to be able to influence the market price or the quantity that will be available for supply to the market, right? Why would they want to do this? In most cases, they do this to be able to influence the market price, right? So that they can benefit from high prices for their goods and services that they provide. So in the case of market power, they will produce less than if competition was allowed. And once less is available, it creates scarcity, and this scarcity leads to higher prices. One example of market power in the agricultural sector could be agricultural inputs, right? Where few large companies dominate the seed or fertilizer market, allowing them to set higher prices and limit, options from competitions, right? Another example is food processing and retailing, where a small number of firms, such as oligopolies, meaning that few firms that have large market size are able to control the market, in terms of what price they to set the seeds for or the food for, both for the farmers when they are taking the raw materials in terms of either eggs or milk from the farmer, and also the final price to the consumer when they go to the retail shops to sell to the final consumer, right? So in these cases, you see market power at play, right? So as I indicated, the fifth factor, which is incomplete market, I will not explain that in this presentation, but leave to the curious reader to assess what that is. Now that we have highlighted the key factors that drive or that lead to market failure, it is important to assess how market failure leads to unsustainable agricultural practices in Africa, right? One of the key unsustainable agricultural practices in Africa is what we call the slash and burn agriculture. What do I mean by slash and burn agriculture? This is the practice where farmers clear the trees and bushes, of a piece of land, burn it so that it will add, the ashes will add to the soil to create organic fertilizer. And in the midterm or short term, of course, the soil will be fertile and they can get more produce from it. Now, when they continue to farm on that land, it loses that fertility, and they'll move to another piece of land, burn the trees, cut the trees, burn them, and the bushes, burn them, and convert that land also to a farmland, right? So this practice is unsustainable, right? Because you distract biodiversity, and you need available land to be able to move from one plot to the other to do this slash and burn practice. Another is overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which is also unsustainable. Another practice is soil depletion from monocropping, right? In the sense that you farm the same crop over and over in the same piece of land year in, year out, right? That's monocropping. And of course, another is deforestation due to agricultural expansion, right? You clear the land, clear the forest and convert the land to agricultural production, then continue moving from one to other piece of land and clearing the forest for that purposes. Another is overgrazing of communal land, meaning that a common land everybody have access, and once it's free access, people will overutilize the land for their benefits, right? So that practice is also unsustainable, right? So in each of these examples, you can trace some of the key factors are highlighted about market failure be present in driving these practices. right? For example, slash and burn agriculture, you have less property rights or land tenure system. Of course, that allowed that. Also, because you have less tenure system of the land, people do not value the biodiversity component appropriately. And therefore, the biodiversity loss due to the slash and burn is not accounted for compared to the agricultural produce that you get from the land. And because of that, it leads to people continue to practice this without knowing the value of destruction in terms of biodiversity that is causing. Likewise, in the case of overuse of chemical fertilizer and pesticides, there's also market failure in that, in the sense that you could, if it's well-regulated market and there's more efficient allocation of resources, farmers will not overly utilize these fertilizers. They'll use this in a more efficient manner so that it does not cause problem downstream, right? Likewise, overgrazing of communal land, because it's a common land, there's no property right assigned to individuals, farmers, people have incentive to overutilize for their own benefit. And this leads to the overgrazing aspect, which is not sustainable. Right. So now that we have highlighted these practices and linked to market failure, one would like to then know what are climate-smart agricultural practices in Africa, what is it about, and the key practices that's currently undertaken in the continent. But before we do that, we want to know what is climate-smart agriculture, which I call CSA. Right? We can define it as an approach that helps in managing landscapes in a quest to address issues or challenges of food security and climate change in the region, right? And these have three interrelated aspects. One, climate-smart agriculture will integrate increased productivity. It will enhance resilience and adaptation to climate change and reduce emissions, right? So these three factors are all important in the process of climate-smart agricultural practices, right? Now, we then would like to highlight the key practices that have been, over the years, practiced in Africa in the case of CSA, right? There are more than 7, but here, these 7 practices are the key ones, the most used ones in the continent. And these are efficient irrigation system, soil and water conservation, agroforestry, conservation agriculture, crop management, improved livestock, integrated pest management. And of course, these you can highlight whether it is for adaptation purposes or mitigation purposes. The table highlights those under the column adaptation, the green boxes implies that practice, and enhances adaptation, whilst the blue boxes highlight that it induces mitigation or it addresses mitigation issues. For instance, soil and water conservation is both for adaptation purposes and mitigation as well, whereas crop management is mainly for adaptation but not mitigation, and so forth. Right. So, of course, these practices, climate-smart agricultural practices, though they have been carried out in most of African countries, their level of practice is lower compared to the rest of the world, right? And of course, this is a region where agriculture is a key player, in the sense it's a major employer, is one of the most important intermediaries that can bridge the gap between moving to large-scale manufacturing and so forth, right? And it's a key that will reduce food insecurity, right? And of course, if CSA will promote productivity, enhance adaptation to climate change, and so forth, and reduce emissions, what are the factors that could enhance the uptake of the CSA in Africa? One of the factors is land tenure security, which is very important. Why? Because there's upfront cost for CSA practices. And therefore, if you have the piece of land, you don't have land tenure rights, it's difficult for you to invest in those lands, And therefore, land tenure security is important. Another enabling factor is access to finance. Of course, finance is important for any of the practices, either irrigation, climate smart irrigation practices, agroforestry, all involve financial commitments. And therefore, if the rural farmer doesn't have access to finance, it becomes difficult to practice the CSA. Another is in terms of extension and training, because it's knowledge-based. CSA is knowledge-intensive. And therefore, the clear use of knowledge to impact productivity is important. And therefore, this knowledge will have to be provided by agricultural extension services, either from the state or from some NGOs to support this process. Another is about research and innovation that will help to develop either improved seeds for, climate-resistant seeds to deal with climate change, or highly yielding seed that you can produce more per unit of a land cultivated, right? Another is about market access. Because it's expensive to do CSA, the produce from the farms will not be competitive if you go with the current market price. So if there's no specific market for CSA-related produce, then the farmer will lose in terms of profit margins. And therefore, having that access to market, that price rightly, the farm produce from activities that are supported by CSA will be useful and important to encourage farmers to adopt CSA. And the last one is climate information services that will enhance more precision and enhance productivity to reduce climate effect on this. Right. So what are generally policies that could be adopted to promote these CSA practices in Africa? Well, one will ask, if you want to promote CSA in Africa, you have to apply some government policies. And one will ask, what are policy instruments? Before you understand what policy instrument the government can implement to enhance CSA adoption. Generally, we have two broad policy instruments. One is economic instrument, and the other is non-economic instruments. So economic instruments, these are financial rewards or costs like taxes, subsidies, or payment to encourage people and businesses to act in ways that will enhance climate resilience, climate-friendly activities, and improve social welfare, right? So it comes through economic incentives, if you talk about economic instruments. Whilst non-economic instruments, they try to influence behavior through rules and standards, not through financial incentives. And examples include regulation, information, voluntary schemes, among others. Right. Some of the economic instruments for CSA in Africa include subsidies for pesticides, subsidies for fertilizer, subsidies for agricultural mechanized instruments like irrigation schemes and so forth. Another is in terms of payment for ecosystem services, such as compensating landowners for maintaining forest cover. Another is in terms of crop or weather index insurance for farmers, right? Another is in terms of tax and charges, that can enhance conservation practices. And of course, another is in terms of tradable permits that, such as carbon credits, that enhance people to benefit from the CSA practices. Of course, you can only benefit from the carbon credit if you have some tenure rights to the land to enable you to practice this CSA. And, without that, you will not be able to benefit directly in terms of carbon credits. Right, I will end my presentation by providing a quick summary of what we've gone through in this short while. Well, we started with providing the importance of the sector agriculture to the Africa landscape and the role of market failure, how market failure, what it is, and the channels through which market failure exists. And in this case, we highlight externalities, public good, information asymmetry, and market power. We did not cover incomplete market. And we use these factors that drive or that explain market failure to highlight how it leads to unsustainable agricultural practices in Africa. And we also highlighted CSA, climate smart agriculture, and approaches or factors that could enhance his usage and adoption in Africa. And finally, we ended up with providing policy instruments that government can utilize to promote CA's practices in Africa, such as subsidies, carbon credits, in terms of economic incentives, and under regulatory information tools, the non-economic policy instrument. We talked about standard awareness campaigns, among others. Thank you for listening.